The views expressed and the opinions given by the individual host and their guests do not necessarily reflect those of Para-X, its affiliates, or its sponsors.
Step outside of your comfort zone. See the world with a whole new perspective. Join us and experience the unexplained on the Paranormal View.
And welcome everybody right here to the Paranormal View on the Para-X Radio Network. I want to thank everybody for being with us tonight, those here in the chat room and those listening from around the world. We appreciate each and every one of you. Tonight, if you do have questions tonight, you can private chat them to either H. Foister or Ceiling Cat, and we will get those answered for you. We have tonight with us Barbara Duncan.
I'm here.
And Jeff, I don't think he's going to be here tonight. If he does, he'll let me know, but we haven't heard anything from him, so I think he's still working.
Yeah, it's not, the large earthquake, although it shook Los Angeles, that didn't really do any damage there. So
right, because it was mainly out to the west desert. Of there. Yeah, out in the desert. So, but tonight we've got a recurring guest, you might say. We just can't keep him away for some reason. I don't know why.
Yeah, I was going to say our guest tonight doesn't need an introduction.
No, not really.
Really, he doesn't need an introduction. He's been on so many times. It's just, yeah.
But we love having him on. He is the Ohio director of MUFON, and we're going to be talking about all kinds of stuff about UFOs and just whatever else might pop up, you might say. So we're going to welcome with us Thomas Wertman.
Thank you. I mean, we're not talking about Bigfoot tonight? Oh, yeah.
Probably not. But
I know your side gig is the Loch Ness Monster, but we're just not going to talk about that.
Okay, thank you. No, I'm happy to be back again. Like I've told you before, I love your show. I love the format. I love the way it flows.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that. Of course, we just like to have a good time anyway. So, Nyla in the chat room, which is Patsy, said to tell you hi.
Say hi to her too.
Yep. Of course, we got to meet you up in Columbus.
Right.
Yep.
At the Star Trek.
Yeah, if that's what you want to call it.
Okay. Now be careful. That's who my radio show's with.
You went to a Trekkie convention. Whoa.
Well,
it's interesting going to them, though, because I did go to one, and I was listening to a lecture, and I can't remember on what or who was the speaker, but I kept getting this red flash in my eyes, and I couldn't figure out what it was. And I look across the room, and there's these people in cosplay outfits, and they're dressed up as Borg, and they have that laser beam coming out. The costumes were that intricate.
Oh, some people really get into that.
Yeah.
But have you ever heard the ones, though, Barbara, that argued about how to speak like Klingon?
Oh, there's a college that'll teach you to speak Klingon.
And there was some arguing over how to speak Klingon. I'm like, wait a minute, isn't this a fictional language? It's made up.
It actually is a real language developed by somebody who's a UN interpreter.
Mm-hmm.
It's fascinating. But he developed a whole language like Tolkien did with Middle Earth. Yeah.
But that's what also brings reality to the show, too, when they go that far.
Yeah. When you get that involved in it, yeah.
Exactly.
Well, the store where that thing was at was a nice store, but the mall itself, there was hardly anything in the mall. I mean,
yeah, exactly.
That was what I was
just shows
about.
That malls are a thing of the past, in that case.
You know, a lot of them have kind of went by the wayside.
Yeah, that style. They're going back to like the strip malls are most making them like a village now.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Sure is.
which is bad news for the zombies because I don't even remember. Was it Day of the Dead, where they inhabited a shopping mall? So
I don't know. I haven't watched that many zombie movies.
I haven't either. But if there's zombies, that's probably a good place to find people, I guess.
Yeah, smorgasbord. Yeah,
There you go.
all you can eat. Yeah.
Wow. All right. I was going to have you on, I don't know, 2 or 3 months ago or a month ago maybe, but you had an event or convention that you went to, and you was talking to a whole lot of people with some new info on UFOs, right?
Yeah, some of the ones that I'm part of a group it's really kind of like by invitation only, and I feel real lucky to be involved with the group on there. And it just happened by coincidence where I just happened to obtain a number of years ago, about 7, 8 years ago, I obtained some files from a UFO investigator from the 1960s. And this guy was one of those pack rat people who really didn't throw much of anything away. I mean, he had newspaper articles, he had reports that his organization did from the 1960s, and some of them were actually some big profile cases. And one of the things I found in there, it's kind of unique, Henry, is all these cards that people sent in requesting a copy of a report from him for like $25 or something like that. And some of them even had the money still attached to the little postcard that they sent in, basically. And I started looking through all these cards, and I'm like, I know that name. I know this name. And I found about 5 names I recognized who were now UFO researchers, and some have been doing this since the 1960s. They're authors, very, very serious individuals. I mean, when they get in to do research, I feel like a rookie compared to these guys on how deep they get into it. They just really do their due diligence. And I just happened to email one of the individuals that I had a card from, and we started corresponding back and forth a little bit, and he goes, hey, how would you like to come into this group I'm with? I'll invite you into the group. And he invited me in. I went to a few meetings, and it's just like a breath of fresh air when you get around these individuals, because they have so much research material available. Just to give you an idea, Henry, the one individual's basement, I'm guessing size-wise, where the material's at is probably maybe about 800 square feet. And that's all UFO research material, pretty much. UFO research material, Bigfoot, a little bit of everything he's got in there, as a matter of fact. And some of the people who've been or did do research for years, one of the things that they're into is these individuals who got into doing UFO research in the 1960s started getting older. It's like, okay, they pass away, or like in the case of the guy I got my material from, he passed away. What happens to all this research material he had? Well, the family, if I didn't take, was going to throw it all out. So I took it and brought it back. Well, these guys are the same way. They keep obtaining more information from other people and keep creating more data, putting it all together. And it's just this massive library that they've shared with me. And I just feel fortunate. So what we do is we go up, we get together a couple times a year, all the ones who can come in. And this last event, I think we had like 25 plus. And you had people coming in from all over the country to this. And it was amazing. A lot of camaraderie, a lot of sarcastic humor. I mean, these guys are brutal when it comes down to humor. But it's an extremely well-educated group. And you get to hear some of the things they're talking about. And one of the things they did was they said, okay, let's go back and let's look at these UFO cases. And what one of the individuals, and I'll keep their names out so people don't bug them, they put together a list of probably about 50 to 100 UFO cases that's over all the years. And they had individuals go out and rate these cases on a scale of 1 to 10, which they thought was the best and which they thought were the worst. And it was interesting to see different ones' perception on what they thought. Well, if you didn't know anything about the case, you kind of gave it a middle-of-the-road 5. because you just kind of like neutralized everything out that way. But one of the ones that impressed me that's rated up very, very high was the one in our own state here, Henry, that happened with the Army Reserve helicopter back in the 1970s. They rated that one almost as number one.
Now, was that the one that was up by the lakes?
This was it actually wasn't by the lakes. It started up in Cleveland, but went to Columbus. What happened was a couple of 4 Army Reserve individuals went to Columbus. A couple of them had to have some medical examinations, and they flew in a Huey helicopter back in the 1970s. Well, they finished their medical exams about, in this case, they finished about 10:30 going on 11 o'clock at night, something like that, and they were flying back from Columbus to Cleveland, Ohio. And a lot of times what they did in that case is they followed almost like interstates. Like you're familiar with Ohio, Henry, so maybe they basically followed like Interstate 71 heading towards Cleveland. And when they got into the area around Richland County, one of the crewmen in the back seat happened to look out the window and he saw this light. There was a satellite, not blinking, but it went behind the aircraft. It kind of went on their left side, and he just saw it disappear down their left side behind their craft at a distance. And he kind of thought it might have been a radio tower or something like that. And a few minutes later, one of the other crewmen looked out the right side window, the opposite side, and he saw a red light coming from a distance. Well, neither one of them had any communication with each other, didn't talk about it, because the first guy really thought it was kind of really non-relevant. He didn't really think it was anything. Next thing you know, this red light starts almost like parallel following the helicopter. So the crewman on the right side of the plane, or a helicopter, I should say, his name was Janicic. He contacted the flight commander who was up in the front seat and said, hey, I see something off in the distance that it could be another aircraft in the area. So he basically said, keep an eye on it. Well, he barely got the words out when this thing started heading at him at what they estimated to be about 600 miles an hour. And they were traveling only about 2,500 feet above the ground. Well, they put the helicopter into a dive to try to avert a potential collision because they knew about 13 miles from there was a base that happened to have high-performance jets at that time, F-100 jets in the 1970s, for a base over there. They tried to contact the base. They got a brief response, and then the radio went dead on the helicopter. No matter what they tried to do, they couldn't make contact with anybody. Well, this object stopped directly above the helicopter. They weren't exposing the descent, but it stopped directly above them.
Wow.
And this light swings around and totally illuminates the inside of the helicopter. And the thing I like about this story is I was able to talk to 2 of the crewmen myself. One of the crewmen I spent quite a bit of time with talking about it, and he said he thought the object was so close, he thought it was going to hit the rotor blades. And it appeared to be metallic. It had a red light on one end, green light on the other end. And what they didn't notice is this object, whatever it was, pulled them up. They were in a descent, but it pulled them up to about 3,500 feet. Eventually, the object released them and kind of went on its own little merry way, heading up kind of towards the northwest. And they regained their senses and also realized that they'd gone up to 3,500 feet, got the helicopter corrected back down to the normal altitude, and went on to Cleveland. But when they landed at Cleveland, per one of the crewmen, they didn't have radio contact with Cleveland. They landed without permission. And security came out to find out who landed a helicopter. But one of the reasons they were so intent on landing is he also said they were almost completely out of fuel.
Wow.
And the normal flights that they'd gone back and forth, the flight commander himself had gone back and forth a number of times between Cleveland and Columbus, and had never been that low on fuel ever. But this was something totally, that caught them off guard, because when they sat down, they had barely enough fuel to get to the ground.
Did a
Now, I'm sure these questions have been asked before, but the lights you described, the green and red, which reminds me a lot of the port and starboard lights on a ship.
Right.
Do you think that that's somehow intentional, that they're trying to, like, duck blind, for example?
I know it's duck blind, but I don't know what the reasoning for the lights were. But they said that the green light, though, completely illuminated the inside of the helicopter. Now, one thing about the lights, though, Barbara, is that particular model of a helicopter had a green canopy on the top. Okay. So if it was a bright white light that could have shined down, it could have potentially changed it to green as it went through the canopy.
Okay.
And there was kind of a differing opinions between the crewmen on that.
Okay.
But they never realized any turbulence or anything like that.
Okay.
So that
and that's my other question is, if you have an aircraft on top of a helicopter, the air turbulence should be pretty tremendous, right?
Should be. It should be, but this object was more or less disc-shaped. And some of the stories that now have been coming out, like since the mid-2000s, that have really been hitting the news recently about the tic-tape shaped objects on there. The pilots in the newer jets have been saying that they see no visible means of propulsion on these things, that there is no engine like we would relate to. So where would the turbulence come from if there's like no means of propulsion? The only thing that could be
the turbulence from the the helicopter would be down, correct?
Right. The turbulence from the helicopter would be pushing down, trying to keep it raising it up.
Okay.
But they picked up nothing from the object above them.
So they couldn't see actually what the object looked like because of the bright lights.
The lights, but also the angle. It was kind of above the helicopter itself. There are different estimates on how far it was above, but the crewman I talked to was very intent on the fact that he thought it was going to hit the blades. And he couldn't see from his angle in the back seat up through the windows. But he saw the object approaching, and it appeared to be metallic, like a gray metallic structure of some sort.
So next question, because they was so low on fuel, were they actually missing any time?
Well, that's a good question. One of the questions I asked one of the crewmen, I said, did you have any unusual dreams, visions, anything like that after the event? No. And I said, well, were you asked that same question by your flight commander? And he goes, now that you mention it, he did ask me that. And he says, I really thought that was unusual. And I don't know. He says, I don't know why he asked me that question. I said, well, the information I dug up is he was told to ask you that question by higher-ups in the military. So evidently, there may have been other cases where individuals who have been through events like this have reported issues later on.
So if there weren't any means of propulsion on the other ship, could it be that they spent fuel, that there was maybe some sort of invisible means of propulsion and the helicopter had to spend more fuel just keeping where it was?
That would have been one of my thoughts, Barbara, is one of a couple things. One, something from that craft was causing, the engine to be under more of a load than normal, causing it to use more fuel. Or what if this helicopter is basically suspended at one point for some time without them realizing it? Yeah. Going back to the issue of potential missing time. Mm-hmm. If that happened, who knows? And this is where the crewman I talked to, he had basically moved on a lot from the whole thing. He was interested to hear about it again, but he kind of put it off in the back of his mind after all these years. Mm-hmm. But when we spent like 3 hours going back over it, it just really brought it all back out.
Now, is it possible with airline pilots and helicopter pilots, we get sort of road hypnosis? Is it possible for the pilots to have that as well?
It's possible, but one of the things that I would also think, though, is as they're coming back from like Columbus to Cleveland, they'd be monitoring other radio traffic. They'd be potentially talking among themselves, and that would help alleviate that. Mm. Now, the one of the crewmen I talked to in particular in depth, he made a comment that he was much closer to one of the other crewmen than the other ones just because of the age differences between them.
Okay.
They could just relate more to each other. And they weren't always assigned, the crewmen weren't always assigned together as a crew.
Oh, okay.
They kind of also rotated them around, and along with even the helicopters that they were in. They didn't use the same helicopter all the time. They rotated between helicopters, and at that time they had something like 6, maybe 8 helicopters in Cleveland for the Army Reserve.
So there's no way they would have gotten that helicopter back and noticed, well, it seems different now?
Well, the helicopter itself, they did do some analysis on it the following day, coincidentally. One is the compass had issues with it. The compass kept spinning. Something had damaged, like some magnetic field had caused a problem with the compass, so they swapped the compass out. Another thing that they did is the radio that they'd had, 2 of the crewmen told me that they had problems with the radio after that event. So they switched them out. So the third thing, which I thought was really unique, they went back and also did a stress analysis on the rotor blades. And I'm thinking, why would you coincidentally come in the next day and start doing what's called a magnaflux test, looking for fractures in the rotor blades and the rotor blade mechanisms? That seems awful coincidental to me.
Well, did they find
they
anything
were
wrong?
Looking for stress too then?
Yeah.
They were looking for stress fractures.
Yeah.
And true, the argument could be made that, okay, maybe there was a regular schedule set up, but things had to be done at certain times frame, but it seems like an awful coincidence they would come in the next day and say, gee, let's look for stress fractures in the metal for some reason.
Yeah.
Almost like maybe they suspected something again. Maybe from other cases.
And was anything else picked up on radar?
No, actually the radar information, nothing. And even the radio signal that was initially acknowledged, that also turned up missing, the tapes of that.
Sounds to me
okay,
like
so
the government was wanting all the information like that.
Exactly. A lot of coincidences in this case, you know.
So when you have a radar, I know they pick up the black box information.
Mm-hmm.
And is there another one, or are they combined where you have an unidentified one? So it reads an object, but it doesn't read the transponder information.
Yeah, at that time, I'm not sure exactly what they had on board the helicopter, but like I can pick up transponders myself in my house with the equipment I've got. And I do get the occasional aircraft, Barbara, that does give me no call sign. And it could be either it's blocked out. There's been a couple times where I was monitoring some other channels, other networks picking up these signals. And you would see, here's an object, evidently an airplane going across, but it says it's got no call sign, no other information with it, and all of a sudden it just mysteriously disappears. And I'm not saying that it's an alien craft, but it makes me wonder at times if it's not potentially military or something along those lines. Almost like what a stealth bomber would go, and disappear.
Okay.
And I've picked up also military aircraft on a couple of the networks I monitor. And I was surprised I picked up a couple of drones even, military drones.
Are they big enough to be picked up that way?
They can be picked up as long as you got a transponder. But the thing about it is some of the networks to provide services that you can monitor aircraft with, what they do is some of them actually screen out the military information before it hits the normal public. So you don't see that. But I've got one where I do see not all military, but I do see some military operations going on out there. But the thing I haven't seen, though, Henry, is like in Ohio here, they do conduct exercises in southern Ohio, and it's my understanding they're going to start using drones. And I haven't seen anything yet with those, but I'm hoping that, I'm able to track some of those in the future.
So this group, the League of Extraterrestrial Gentlemen.
Yeah.
When you talk about them having, like basements full of evidence, are you talking about just documents? Are you talking about video? Are you talking about actual evidence, physical evidence as well?
Well, that's the part that when there is physical evidence that they've got a hold of, the thing is getting it analyzed. And they're very, very cautious on any analysis. And they haven't seen, I don't think, anything yet that's come up super, super solid on there. There's been some things that have been very unique. But when you get the results back from, let's say, one test that showed something is unique, you don't want to run with one test. You want to get multiple tests done.
Mm-hmm.
Because there has been cases where not just them, but other ones have done testing on the materials. One lab says it's good, and then all of a sudden you have another lab test it, and they say, no, this is normal. There's nothing unusual about this. So you've got 280 degree opposites on the results. And there was one that they ran into that's from a very, very old UFO case going back years that they did analysis on. That the initial analysis said that, yeah, this was unusual. Then they did a follow-up that said, no, this is not unusual. So it's and the bad part is some of the fragments that they're finding, Barbara, are so small that by the time they do some of the testing, there's not much left.
Not much left. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's the stuff they're finding really right now, I guess the best way to term it's inconclusive on there.
So when you talk to abductees, and do you have access to the clothes that they were wearing? Has anybody done, say, DNA analysis? Or spectro?
Not DNA, but spectroscopic.
Okay.
Yes, we have. In our case, I've had one of my cases done, which goes back to some fishermen who lost 3.5 hours of time. And they did find, when they did that detailed analysis on it, they found normal chemicals, which goes back to things they were exposed to, like they were both in construction, and they found evidence of like little droplets of paint. And when I'm talking about droplets, I mean, I'm talking about droplets that you could barely even see, like a speck of a pin, that they picked up on the clothing. But what they also picked up on the clothing, Barbara, was normal chemicals. But what they're looking for in some of these cases is just not normal chemicals, but chemicals in unusual places or something like that shouldn't be. So when they found some of these chemicals, some of it actually goes back to almost like deodorants. But normally you think, okay, deodorants under your arms, but it wasn't under the arms. That's where they was finding these chemicals at. It was actually on unusual parts of the body that you wouldn't expect those chemicals to be at. That's what was unusual. And then they went back and did a comparison between, like the fisherman I had dealing with, also Betty Hill, who was the abductee back in the 1960s. A friend of mine has part of her dress for comparison type specimen. She found a similar type of thing on Betty Hill's dress where it goes back to base like a deodorant, but it was on unusual places of her clothing that didn't make sense. And there was a third case that came from Canada that was the same way. It had the same type of chemicals, similar type of chemicals, but in very unusual places on the clothing.
So when they have this evidence, I mean, I'm sure they're storing it for potential. Is it possible to go back, or has been contaminated too much, that they're storing this where you could do DNA evidence?
Right.
Or electron microscope.
Right.
Throw it underneath there to see what's around.
And one of the things, challenges, is just getting access to the equipment or people to do it for us on there, because we're pretty much doing things on our own pocketbooks. And some of the ones I know who are doing it have their own labs, but then also they're not taking their own test results. They're sending it to other places to have it also tested, just to make sure that, they're not being like biased out there with their opinions.
Sure, yeah.
But I did see fragments, though, when I was at with the group that had gone through a couple different analyses on there of metallic fragments. That one test showed they were highly unusual, another test said, not that unusual. And I think the biggest thing, it goes back to like a chain of custody, who had these materials before. How many hands did they pass through? Were any other testing done to them along the way to potentially contaminate these things? That's one of the difficulties when you get some of these things that have occurred like years ago, let's say at Roswell, and some material has been, let's say, put away by somebody. What's been the chain of custody for that material over all the years, and what's happened to it?
Right.
That's the challenge.
Well, you brought up Roswell, and I have to ask because it's making the rounds on social media. There is evidently in October going to be a group that's going to try to storm Area 51.
You're kidding.
Don't.
Just to let everybody know, I'm not part of that group.
No, me either.
I'm not going to get my Winnebago driving across the desert and try to get in.
Let's say that we do not advocate anybody trying to break through Area 51.
Absolutely. You mentioned that, though, Barbara. Have you ever looked at some of the YouTube videos of people trying to get past the gates of Area 51?
Yeah.
I haven't.
And they don't get very far.
Well, the best one I saw was two little old ladies, of all things. These guys are setting out by Area 51, and these two ladies pull up by them. And they say, where's that base at, that secret base? And they go, well, it's down the road down this way. But, lady, you can't go down there. All of a sudden, this lady, boom, she hits the gas, and she's tearing off down this road. And you can see the dust flying. And next thing you know, here you see the camo dudes in their pickup truck taking off after them. And I don't know how many minutes later as you see a sheriff cruiser flying down because they notified a sheriff, and I think it's like a $600 or $1,000 fine immediately. And you could see the dust trail going off at a distance before they finally caught him. It was great.
Never trust little old ladies.
Oh, never. And the guys in the car like, wow, they're crazy. Or you believe up to little old ladies? But it was great. But I haven't heard that much about that event. But then again, I haven't followed that part of it. I just heard some rumors a while back that people were talking about doing it. But you never know. They may not have to if stuff starts coming out more.
That's true.
And besides, who knows if it's out at Area 51 anyway? It may be someplace completely different.
Well, the fact that they're advertising it on social media means they're not keeping it a secret. That's for darn sure.
That's for sure. And if they're using Twitter, it's definitely not being.
Well, how close was those earthquakes to Area 51?
You're talking about 150 to 200 miles, possibly. I'm guessing. I'm just guessing off the top of my head.
It was strong enough to be felt in Las Vegas, and it was just southwest of Las Vegas, about 150 miles southwest.
Okay, that would put it about 240 miles away, so they might not, it'd be on the borderline of probably feeling it.
Yeah.
Because Area 51 is about 90 miles north of Las Vegas.
Yeah,
So,
well,
probably not.
I'm not going there anytime soon anyway. So.
I had to go out there.
Oh, did you?
Oh yeah,
to Area 51.
Yeah,
Yeah, right.
Went out on vacation one year, and I took the wife with me before we were married, and not to say I do play pranks, but I do play pranks. And we went out over July 4th. I thought it was a good time to go out there. It was 100 and some degrees out in the sun, about 110, 115. Well, before we went out there, we were in downtown Las Vegas. And my wife goes, or actually she was my girlfriend, and she goes, hey, why don't we find a wedding chapel? And I said, don't you know? They close up all the wedding chapels over July 4th out here in Las Vegas because too many people get drunk and they get married and then they regret it afterwards.
Wow.
She goes, really? I said, yeah, just think about it. We get about 3 blocks down the street and she goes, you were lying, weren't you? I said, yeah, but it was a great one, wasn't it? But it was that same time, though, we had a rental car, and we took, and I said, we're going to go out to Area 51. And she's willing to go along with you on all this stuff. So we went out to the little Alien out there. We had to get that experience, go out and get a little meal out there and get a few drinks.
Yeah.
And then we drove down to Area 51 itself. And when we went back there, it's off of what they call extraterrestrial highway a good ways. We found like the area where they have the little mailbox, which is now painted white, I believe. And we go back this road. I forget how many miles it was. I think they told us to go back this one road like 12 plus miles. And basically you're going back a dirt road that has ranches around the area. We finally get back to this area that they've got the signs up there that do not go past this point, and you can see the security sitting up on the hill in their pickup trucks. At that same location, there's somebody else out there doing the same thing I was. And he said, yeah, he says, I'm out here kind of just parked and seeing what's happening out here during the day. And we're both watching the guys up in the pickup truck, and they're watching us. And next thing you know, here comes a bus by that's loaded full of personnel, but you can't see in because they've got the windows all covered up. They go flying past us, and I get out my cameras and start taking pictures of the whole area with all the electronic equipment. And there's electronic equipment up all around the hills. All you see is these little antennas sticking up all over the place. And most likely what they're doing is they're monitoring people coming back into that area. Who knows what all type of equipment they've got in there. But I was filming those. I was filming the guys up in their truck. The guide I was talking to gave me this big pair of binoculars to look at the guys up in the truck. And we're standing right by the signs that say, don't go past the sign, no photography here. And my wife really didn't understand the situation. She goes, what if I start walking down this road?
Oh, God.
And I said, you're on your own, and I'm not paying your fine.
And I'm not coming after you.
Oh, yeah. But the thing I had to do is, I mean, you get defiant out there. You know, here the guys are watching me. I'm watching them. And I pick up this rock and steal a rock from the desert, which makes a lot of sense. But I wanted a souvenir. And I looked right at the guys in the truck, and I put the rock up, my point towards the rock for some reason, and I put it in my pocket like I'm stealing it, you know. And these guys are probably thinking, there's another idiot stealing another rock for a souvenir, you know. But we're going to have to bring more rocks out here before long if people keep doing that.
Wow.
But you know, you got the feeling that, yeah, you're not really going to go past that point. And I'm sure if you did try to go past that, I mean, they do have the local sheriff there, but base securities, who knows how much they're going to have in base security out there real quick.
Yeah,
And
I'm sure they got ground sensors and everything else, too.
Oh, sure. They've got underground sensors, most likely to pick up vibrations if you try going across, not on the roads, but going across the country. They would probably pick up the vibrations, if not pick up electrical signals of some sort. So, I mean, I wouldn't try it myself.
Wow. All right, I think, I guess we need to take us a quick break. And we'll be back in just a couple of minutes. It won't take us real long. I'll keep it kind of short here if I get on the right page. And so I think, Barbara, you want to take us out?
Sure, I can do that. Folks, you're listening to the Paranormal View here on Para X Radio. Come back and join us with our very special guest, Thomas Wertman. We'll be talking UFOs. Be back in a moment.
Whether you're listening at home, at work, or anywhere, thanks for making Para X part of your day. Your source for everything paranormal, Para X.
And welcome back, everybody, to the Paranormal View right here on Para X Radio Network. I want to thank everybody for being with us tonight, those in the chat room and those listening from around the world. And tonight we have with us Barbara Duncan.
I'm still here.
And we got Thomas Wertman.
I'm still here.
And speaking of listeners from around the world, where do we have listeners at tonight, Marla?
They are all over the United States, the United Kingdom, Canada, and unknown is back, so Ixnay on the Area 51.
Oh,
storming. Yep.
They could be listening.
Yep.
Yeah.
Maybe they were the ones tapping my phone this afternoon.
Oh.
Yeah, have you ever had a conversation on a cell phone where you had like a 3-second delay?
No.
Not to my knowledge.
That happened to me.
Really?
Yeah. I was talking to one of my fellow researchers, and he calls me up, and I answer him, and he didn't respond back. And all of a sudden, after 3 seconds, he responds back to me. And it took us about 20 seconds to realize that there's like a 3-second delay happening on
That's weird.
our ends. Yeah, so we eventually had to switch different phones, and we were finally able to get away from it, but we had to get off our cell phones to do it.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any way to track the sea?
Possibly, but I'm like, okay, if they're going to track me, who cares? You know.
Well, you got to figure they're opening up and they're starting to question more pilots about UFO activity.
And not only pilots, but I mean, were you following the recent last couple of days, Barbara?
No.
Tucker Carlson interviewed Trump and even brought the question up yesterday.
Really?
About the UFOs. I mean, it happened a few days before that, but Tucker Carlson asked him this time. And he says, I don't particularly believe in them, but, you know.
There's
and
always the but.
He didn't want to spend a whole lot of time talking about the subject. But he has been briefed on what was happening with the Navy and so forth. Now, supposedly it was like a short briefing, but he was made aware of what was going on.
And if there was something, or if there wasn't anything, he wouldn't have been briefed on it.
You would think so.
Yeah.
But with everything coming out, I mean, he was reportedly briefed on it. Also, the head of the Senate Intel Committee, Mark Warner, was also briefed on what was happening with the Navy and some of the things that they were encountering. And they're admitting that our people now are tracking things that they can't explain. And they're very open, saying that, you know, that we're not saying they're alien by any means, but our pilots are tracking things that we can't explain that have unusual characteristics, like we were talking about earlier. No wings to provide lift. They're not seeing any engines, and even through infrared, they're not picking up signatures of engines. And even if you had something like a stealth, there would, to me, be a very, very minor signature on infrared, because there's still heat coming off of the planes. But
do you
Go ahead,
think it might be some sort of electromagnetic propulsion?
Well, or gravitational.
Right.
They're really not sure, because they're saying that these things are traveling at speeds that are hypersonic, which means that they're going at least Mach 5. So the pilots who have been describing these things, and there's been two different events. One happened in 2004 off the coast of California with the carrier group Nimitz. The other was 2014 to 2015 off the coast of Florida with the carrier group for the Teddy Roosevelt. Two different carrier groups have encountered these. And the ones that happened back in 2004 reported seeing what they described as the tic-tac shaped object. One of the individuals that's been more vocal about has been David Fravor, who was one of the pilots. He's been very open talking about what he saw. And he said, these things were just moving in such a way that he says, we don't have craft that can duplicate that. We don't have a craft that can stop on a dime, a craft that can go from like 0 to hypersonic speeds instantaneously. We just don't have that.
But here's the interesting thing. Even on our planet, they would still have to follow, certain scientific rules, and one of them is when you hit Mach 1, you make a loud sonic boom, right?
That's correct.
We're not hearing those booms.
No, there's no sonic booms along with them either, Barbara, you're right. So it appears that whatever these things are may have a way of suppressing that sonic boom also.
Wow.
The ones, the second carrier group, the Teddy Roosevelt, one of the pilots said that this object that he saw appeared to be like a cube inside of a sphere. And this object went directly between him and another fighter, which were only about 100 feet apart. So they're going one direction, this object comes the reverse direction and goes right between them. And it just scared, to be honest with you, scared the crap out of them. And they didn't know what it was. Something that's come out, though, and recently, is some were giving an argument saying that maybe what they were seeing was a type of, again, going back to balloons. But balloons can't make these drastic motions.
No.
But the reason they brought it up is because there is a type of balloon that was developed that we think of when you've got like things like weather balloons out there. You've got the balloon itself, but then at times you have like a tether coming off of them with possibly like antennae hanging down below box-like structures so they can track them on radar. Well, a theory that came out back in the 1940s was, what if you could put the box-like object that they're using for it to help get a radar signature from inside the balloon? And they were saying, well, maybe this is what he saw. A balloon that had the cube inside of it was like one of these specialized balloons. Now, to me, it seems like it's a reach again, because you have to look at all the characteristics that these pilots are describing, especially the rapid changes of direction, the rapid descents. And to our knowledge, I mean, the human body can't take those type of G-forces. The aircraft that we have, an F-18 fighter breaks apart at probably about 15 Gs. These objects reportedly pulling up to 40 Gs from what they calculated out. And the human body blacks out at about 5 Gs. So what's being reported by these Navy personnel predominantly is something that, as some of them say, it doesn't appear to be from this earth, but they don't want to say it's extraterrestrial. It's just something we have no idea about this technology. That's why the Navy's changing guidelines as far as reporting UFOs, because they want pilots to offer more information. They want other crew to offer as much information as possible to really dig into this. And this is really the first time that I can remember the government actually coming out and saying, hey, there's stuff being reported by not just individuals like the public, but military personnel, people who are responsible for flying multi-million-dollar fighters, responsible for carrying armament with nuclear weapons, people responsible for our safety, and these are ones reporting these things. And they don't know what they are.
I don't see how a balloon can go those supersonic speeds. Wind currents don't move it that way.
No, and that's why I don't buy that argument. Now, I'm not saying that some of the
they'd
stuff
also be ripped to shreds, wouldn't they?
Well, without a doubt.
Yeah.
But some of the things maybe that people are seeing can go back to possible balloons. There was a incident over Kansas that occurred, was a couple months ago now, something like that, where it was hitting the news where people saw these white, brilliant objects during the day, off in the distance. They were making the news, and all of a sudden it came out that these were actually part of a DARPA program. What they'd done is they'd released a couple balloons in Maryland, and these balloons were like high-altitude balloons designed for testing various things for the government. And they'd actually flown out over Kansas, and that's what the people were seeing. And I was able to even track those on my network that I log into. And I could go back in time and track them, and yeah, they were in that same area. And that's what the people were seeing. So some of the things that's being reported could go back to that, but to me, when you've got the military pilots reporting this, but also not just reporting them there, but reporting them over in, let's say, the Gulf area, like these objects, whatever they were, followed them and stayed with them.
Well, it's nice to know that the UFOs community also has a orb problem. But when pilots, before they actually fly, they get debriefed, right? So they know what they're supposed to be finding up there. Correct?
Right. And that's what, in this case, during the Nimitz, they had been sending the planes up over roughly about a 2-week period. The planes had not been in the same area where these objects were being seen. They'd tracked them on radar for like 2 weeks, but it wasn't until the encounter by Commander Fravor that they actually were able to get a crew of military fighter jets, F-18s, in that area. That was the first problem that they've had. I mean, they'd seen them, but they'd never been able to get the jets there. Once Fravor saw them, they documented there was actually 2 flights. Fravor's was one who actually had the closer encounter with him. That was one that was best documented. Then they also dug up the one off the coast of Florida. Crews started coming out talking about that one, describing really what seems to be almost like a parallel type of event. People, the pilots reporting the same type of objects, the same characteristics. And one of the videos that's available on the internet is called Go Fast, where you can see an object being tracked by one of the F-18s. And the pilot was actually locked onto it manually.
Right.
Which was about a 1 in a million shot to him. And you can hear just in the pilot's voices that, hey, this is unusual. This is not the norm. And when you hear...
Didn't it all of a sudden just shoot off to the left?
Yeah, well, it was shooting off in there. And then the thing about the videos is you're only seeing a certain portion.
Right.
Supposedly, there's much more to videos out there. And Fravor even talked about the video that was available from the West Coast. He said the video was not from his aircraft, but it was from a later flight because, like you talked about, Barbara, once he had his encounter, he came back and he basically passed on his story to the other pilots. And the other pilots were the ones which had FLIR technology on board their aircraft where they could pick those objects up on camera. So there was that relay of information.
And I'm sure the aircraft carrier's radar had it tracked also.
Well, it wasn't as much the aircraft carrier's radar, but a guided missile cruiser.
Ah.
The guided missile cruisers have the Aegis system on board the Princeton, which is actually one of our best radar systems out there. And the aircraft themselves, the fighter jets, had theirs was by Raytheon Air Equipment, but they weren't picking up the signatures on their radar on board the F-18s. The Princeton did. There's also the radar planes, what they call the Hawkeyes, in the same region. The Hawkeyes actually could barely pick up a signature, and they turned it back over to Princeton, which had the best radar out there. Interestingly enough, though, the tapes, the data drives on the Hawkeyes reportedly turned up missing after that event. And they don't know what happened to them, other than somebody came in.
Yeah, I'm sure that somebody knows what happened to them. And if there wasn't really anything there, stuff wouldn't come up missing like that.
No, and now as you get deeper and deeper into the story, now you're seeing the briefing and discussions in Congress about what happened. When you openly admit that the president was briefed on what happened, even though it may have been a short briefing, different ones they're announcing are being made aware of it. And they're even saying now more Congress members are getting interested in this, and they're also wanting to get information on what has transpired. Because it's a possible situation of national security. The other thing is, think about it. I mean, you've got military aircraft flying around these regions, and a lot of it's where they're doing training at. And these objects that they can't identify are in these training areas, and it could pose a danger to the pilots.
Sure.
Well,
Yeah, but we've all seen War of the Worlds. My speculation is that if they've mastered that good of space travel, 9 times out of 10, our weapons aren't going to be that useful.
That's what you'd assume. Yeah, I agree with that, Barbara. I mean, first of all, I mean, the performance that they're talking about these things having, if one of our jets tried to chase it down, it's not going to happen to begin with. The other thing is they also reported these objects not only being in the air, but going down to sea level, if not below the water, traveling at speeds of 70 miles an hour. Where you're talking underwater, the same type of a craft going underwater, traveling at twice the speed or more than what our submarines can.
Yeah.
So you're not going to have much success there either, trying to chase it down.
Well, we just watched, Musk's, I think it was the Central rocket, miss the drone ship, land in the ocean, I don't know what speed, and exploded. If you hit the water at 70 miles an hour, that's going to hurt, right?
Oh, without a doubt. It's going to take pretty much anything as we know it apart, you would think. But whatever these objects are, they're capable, based on the descriptions, of going in the air, underwater, doing maneuvers that we can't associate with any normal craft.
Yeah. Now, we was talking like this new series and stuff. Elizondo has been doing the investigation, which he had, I guess the job he had with the government, he knew a lot of secret stuff. And I'm wondering how much stuff he really knows about UFOs that he cannot say.
Well, that was some of the discussion going on in the group that I'm with, is how much does he really know, or maybe is some of the stuff he's implying that he may have more information on than what he does. We're really questioning sometimes how much information he really does have.
Well, I'm sure if he does have it, he's I guess when he quit the job, he is obligated not to be able to say anything.
Correct, and that's because he said he can't disclose anything. It's predominantly he can't because of national security.
Right.
But it seems like some of the discussions I've heard him in is somebody comes out and reveals more information. It seems like he takes another step forward, saying, okay, now they've created a new guideline, and I can go up to this new line.
I can go up to here.
Because they set the bar a little bit higher.
Right.
That's what it appears on there.
So I've been watching some of those, and he's one that has all these Navy flyers giving out testimonies and stuff about it.
Yeah, what they did is they got a hold of a number of them. And when you go through a lot of information, some of the stuff is a little bit difficult to decipher. One of the people that's in the group I'm with has talked to, like, Fravor and the radar operators and the one out on the West Coast. That's where he's from, so he's talked to those individuals out in that region. And the friend of mine tells me some of the stuff, but then certain things when he's not sure about, he doesn't want to stretch it.
Right.
He's just going right with the facts. And Elizondo has picked up on the same ones that one of my friends has talked to. And according to some of the stuff when he tried to decipher it, they did send, like, Fravor to the Pentagon to be debriefed. Now, who debriefed him? It could have been an Elizondo. It might have been Elizondo who did the talks with him. Or they didn't say who else might have been involved with those. And those conversations most likely were some of the stuff that was passed on to Congress. Some of the things that came back from, those events.
Right.
That's what I would suspect. And
by Congress, you mean the Armed Services Committee or the Intelligence Committee?
I'm thinking Intelligence Committee.
Okay.
When you go back to, like, in this case, Warner was one of the ones they mentioned. But also on some of the other individuals involved with the Pentagon program, they go back to, like, intelligence. In this case, Chris Mellon was involved with intelligence. A number of the other ones were in the Pentagon, but I think at least that's my guess, is where they're going with it. The intelligence committees.
Well, I mean, I assume both the House and the Senate, because the House would be the appropriations part of it.
Right. The
Okay.
Senate is the one who actually got the money approved, though, for the Pentagon programs.
Okay.
And that's also, you've got some of the different ones now coming out getting vocal about, from Congress. Like in this case, Harry Reid, who's no longer in the Senate. He was kind of quiet there for a while, and I got vocal again about, hey, we need to appropriate money for this again. We need to keep on the research going with this. Because in his mind, there was something there that they were investigating.
Right. I'm sure a lot of them know a lot more. They know all kinds of the secrets. I'm sure they don't know all of them, but they know more than the common person does.
Oh, sure. And the thing is, they probably have some information on some, let's say, projects that we have going, black budget projects. At least, a vague idea of what the project's about. Because I wouldn't doubt if they do have some sort of a drone that they're developing that has not characteristics that these pilots are identifying, but something we're not familiar with, at least right now, that's beyond our normal scope.
True. And
Like
if they do anything like that, I'm sure that the government knows, or some of them in the government knows, that they are in touch with some of the aliens, and I'm sure that's why we have not tried to fire on anything like that.
Yeah, they're using discretion, and to me, that's where I'd really like to know more about some of these things. Because today there was the story about, I was reading over about it said a government official. And the question is, that's pretty wide open.
Right.
Government official. Are they referring to, let's say, Elizondo, or are they referring to somebody else, but about wreckage being recovered years ago that they've had for some time, trying to engineer it? Now, it's very open on what they're referring to the wreckage. Are they referring to wreckage from Roswell? They're referring to wreckage from something else? Or is it even anything related to extraterrestrials? Is it wreckage from maybe some foreign country that they've recovered on there? But the way to really lead you to believe it was wreckage from an extraterrestrial craft. They didn't identify where. Was it Roswell? Was it from some of the other ones which reportedly happened? Was it down in, let's say, like Mississippi, some of the other places where there's been recorded crashes over all these years?
Or Kecksburg.
Kecksburg. Now, Kecksburg, I still think that may have been our military, one of our craft. Or they're saying possibly Russian that they want to get their hands on. But you never know. I could be completely wrong because there's always been those rumors about the bell that's been out there.
Right, that the Nazis supposedly had?
That's correct, that they developed. And one of the things I've always wondered about is they're using mercury.
Well, if they did something like that, how'd that thing fly so long before it ended up crashing here? I mean,
well, good question. I mean, I've gone back and read over some of the things, and that's one of the real challenges in the UFO field is separating fact from fiction.
Right.
I got, I don't know how many emails recently about somebody putting out a new book on the Nazis and their developments and technologies. And there was reportedly that they had a couple bombers back then, that one of the higher ups in the Nazi regime, the story goes, reportedly took off with one of the bells in one of these bombers to South America. And again, it's just, I guess you'd say really it's the urban myth is what it's going back to.
Right.
No.
But, we both know, I mean, Operation Paperclip, and we got a lot of the scientists from there, all of which were probably involved within the NASA space program. And they're, the early Apollo flights, the Gemini flights, were bell-shaped.
You're right. You're right. They were bell-shaped, and I can't argue that. You got me there, Bart. But then again, to me, it's almost a natural shape for something like that, though.
Sure.
To go up.
Well, if you're thinking of reentry, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah.
The thing that got me about the bell, though, is when they talk about using something like mercury, revolving at extremely high speeds. Now, I'm thinking if you had mercury, I don't know how they're doing it, whether using like a gas, something like that, but mercury itself, I just think of the weight. And if you're revolving something at a super high speed, what would that centrifugal force be like coming from that?
Not to mention the vapor.
You're correct. I mean, we had, this sounds crazy, but back when I was a kid, we had, my dad had a peanut butter jar, one of those old little Jiffy jars, and it was about a quarter full of mercury.
Wow.
Yeah. And as a kid, we used to get coins out and float coins on top of it.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah. We didn't know any different back then, And years later then, I mean, it was in my dad's basement for years, and my one nephew happens to be involved in an area like that. He says, you got to get rid of this, and he knew a place to take it to where it could be taken care of properly.
Huh. Yeah, mercury ain't anything to play with.
No. Well, we did as a kid, and we never thought about it. And
You didn't know about it.
It was in everybody's thermometers that they stuck in their mouth when they got sick.
Sure. Yeah. That's it.
Yeah.
Don't bite it, though.
Yeah, where my dad got it from, I have no idea.
They used to sell it. You could get them in ceramic jugs, the kind that looks like moonshine jugs.
Okay.
With corks in them, and it's just mercury. Yeah. And what they were doing, well, chemists would use it, but I can't imagine anyone else. But yeah.
Wow.
Very common. But yeah, I was watching a show, I don't remember what channel or what show specifically, where they were talking with people about Operation Paperclip. And for some of us who remember it, knew very well what was going on there. But it's like, I had no idea Nazis were involved in our space program. And I'm going, really?
Really?
I'm still like going, huh?
Well, you think about the general public, a lot of them may not have been aware of that.
Well, they took them out there to the desert and hit them out.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, and then not only the desert, but other bases on
Right.
there. And he kind of really separated them.
And they was the one that they brought over and got all the information they could out of him, and then shipped him back to another country where they tried him and killed him.
Oh, well, I mean, here we had von Braun, we had Oberth, we had a number of the top scientists on there.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the things that I remembered reading, Barbara, is a letter by Oberth, who was one of the top scientists, right, with von Braun.
Mm-hmm.
And he was saying that, during World War II, that they were seeing Foo Fighters, as we called them. They were also seeing the same things. And he says they thought that the Foo Fighters that they were seeing, their German pilots were Americans, some sort of an American weapon.
Okay.
And on the other hand, we saw the Foo Fighters and thought they were a German-type technology. And he says they're actually neither. He said because we were tracking things on our primitive radar back then going thousands of miles an hour. He said they weren't ours.
Right.
And he knew that they weren't ours either.
Yeah, we don't really know exactly what they were. So
No, we don't.
I don't think that they was actually shooting any of our planes down, but they were flying all around them, and I don't know whether they was just trying to see what we was doing or knew or what.
It appears they're just kind of like flying around, like, almost like observing.
Right.
Gives you almost that opinion, like, hey, look at the crazies over here with this thing of wings and props on it.
Right.
But you would think with that many planes up in the air shooting at each other, that at some point in time one of them would have been hit. But there's no records of anything.
No, there's no records like that I could find. And you had bomber groups that you had hundreds of planes in at one time. Some of the raids they had in Germany, I can't remember how high in numbers. I think some of them even went up to almost like 1,000 planes, which is incredible.
Right.
But there were the stories of the Germans reportedly getting some of the technologies. And then going back in, because they were very big into the mystical things and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And try to engineer things. That's where the story about the bell came out. Also, you had the Vril Society back then. And I was watching that crazy movie like I told you about before the show, Barbara, and that was actually about the Vril. And it was
wow.
bad. And it was bad. The Vril controlling dragons.
Okay.
And the dragons were taking our planes down.
Well, I think we need to go ahead and take our last break real quick, and it'll be short. So I'll have Barbara take us out, and I'll bring us back. So, Barbara?
Okay, well, hopefully you're still listening to the Paranormal View here on ParaX Radio Network here on Saturday evenings. Come back and join us anytime. Right now, we'll be right back with our very special guest, Thomas Wertman, talking more UFOs. We'll be back in a moment.
ParaX Radio, programming for the open mind.
Welcome back, everybody, to the Paranormal View right here on the ParaX Radio Network. And we got Barbara Duncan with us.
I'm still here.
And we got Thomas Wertman with us.
I'm still here.
Now, before we run too far, of course, Thomas is on here an awful lot. We like to have him. He does a great job all the time. But because we've done this so much and he was with us so much, he said, I think I would like to try radio. So Thomas went out and got him a radio show. Isn't that right?
Yeah. Actually, they came and got me.
Oh.
But I've been approached, I don't know how many times over the last few years to maybe get involved with one. But one thing is, like, Henry, it takes a lot of work.
Yep.
And I'm like, I don't know if I'm going to get involved with one of these. And the other thing is as I get older, sometimes I'm like, sometimes you get frustrated with people. You ever do that?
Yeah.
And I just listen to some of the other shows and how, like, let's just say how compassionate sometimes hosts could be or overlook certain things, but there's times I'm like, you have got to be, well, I won't say the right word right now, but but some of the stories that some come up with. And it would be sometimes it's hard to say, hey, come on, tell me the truth. Don't lie. You're making stuff up, because that happens out there. Matter of fact, that's what I did the other night, Henry. I got my soapbox because I saw a couple of things on the internet that people who were reporting things. That's like, no. This is not right. You've got no evidence. All you're doing is making up an interesting story behind stuff. And it's not just because they don't lack evidence, but it's the story itself. There's so many holes in it, it's not funny when you research it. And it's hard to come out and not tell somebody, hey, you're full of crap sometimes. And why I get frustrated with that is there's so many people out there doing great research, doing great work. And you see sometimes good stories getting hidden like the tree in the forest. Here's this great report out there, but then sometimes people would rather listen to this really loony story that makes no sense than hear really the good evidence behind something somebody else may have. But I went ahead and decided, okay, I'm going to do it anyway. So I started doing mine at the beginning of the year. And I guess the good thing, Henry, is I'm still on the air yet. I haven't been thrown off. So that's one good sign. But it's been going well, and I feel like I'm learning a lot internally by doing it.
Well, you get to meet a lot of people, too, at those events that you go to.
Yeah, you get to meet a lot of people, but sometimes getting them to come forward, because sometimes the people that I run into, they're more into their research, and they don't really like to talk in the open as much sometimes.
Right.
Within a private group of the other researchers will talk about stuff, but when it comes out into the public, sometimes they're like, no, I'm in my research, I'm doing it for my group,
Right.
They're just looking for the answer. But you do run into a lot of people, and there are some really interesting people out there. And there's a number of them I see on TV and on the internet I would really love to talk to about some of their stories.
Right.
Because some of the ones which may really seem the most off the wall may be, some of the most interesting ones out there. And the other thing you find is when you talk to some of these people, like doing investigations, they may have actually other stories other than the one you're discussing that may really be much more interesting.
Right.
Something else that happened to them in their life. But the show's going well. It's called UFO Odyssey, and it's on Odyssey channel.
They just go to odyssey.com?
They can go to odyssey.com. They can actually find us on pretty much all the major podcasting, and it's available on demand now, too. So they can pick it up anytime they want. It's not locked into a given time of day anymore.
Your show's up on YouTube?
Haven't got on YouTube. I was actually thinking about doing the video on YouTube.
Okay.
One of the things I'm looking at doing is, as I jokingly call it, hanging up my spikes in October. And getting away from the job that I've had to pursue to like the last 50 years to support myself. And say it's time to have fun finally in the life, And I think if I do that, that's going to open up the avenues to do the things on YouTube, actually get into the studio, get a lot of phone calls coming in and stuff like that, and really open it up. So I'm looking forward to that part of the life. Not that I've been counting the days, but I do have a calendar on my computer at work where I've got the days numbered. And October 1st is the official day. Matter of fact, Monday. They don't know it yet, but Monday I'm going to be going in and filing for Social Security.
Hey, nothing wrong with that either.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, it's just like it's time. It's time.
Yeah, that's the way we are. So I tell you, you'll have a lot of time on your hands.
What that's the thing right now is I'm looking forward to the extra time.
Well, that's the way you look at it. But then once it gets here, you say, "What the hell am I going to do today?"
Well, see, I've been planning that, Henry. I've got in my garage, half my garage is UFO related material. That's one thing. I've got involved with a couple of the other groups. I dropped a couple of groups I was with and got involved in some other ones with some higher level research. The other thing I got into is my 3D printers, designing and building them out. So I've got a ton of little projects all laid out for those over the next who knows how long.
Hey.
Cough, cough, buck.
Yeah. And the wife doesn't mind me spending money on them. She says, "Oh, it's a good hobby for you."
So have you ever have you ever met Elizondo?
I've been up to him, and he was so busy you couldn't get a private conversation with him.
Ah.
But when I did meet him, though, he seemed like a very personable individual, very well spoken, but also he knew what to say and what not to say. He was also very well guarded because his background was in covert operations.
Right.
And the thing is with him, just because he was involved in covert operations, I'm not saying it in a negative way, but it just leads you sometimes to believe, okay, is he really telling me something good, or is he giving me something that's false information?
Like maybe he's still working with the government.
Exactly.
But he's
maybe
out
he's
there
still
to
involved
kind of
in
like
some manner.
lead you down the wrong path, kind of.
Exactly. Is he giving me some stuff to kind of mislead me or not? But be very honest with you, he seemed like a very personal individual. He's the type of guy I'd like to go out drinking with, after a meeting or something like that. And I think he has some really good laughs with him.
Well, you've met some others that's pretty good into the paranormal and UFO. So.
Oh yeah. When I was watching TV, matter of fact, today I was going over some of the broadcasts when they were talking to the president about about notifying him. The guy they always call up is Nick Pope.
Right.
And Nick Pope was with the Ministry of Defense of England.
Right.
He was kind of like he refers it to himself as being kind of like Elizondo's parallel in England when he was there. And he's another unique guy that when you talk to him, we had some good conversations. Matter of fact, one night I had him on a Skype conference. And I was asking Nick, I said, Nick, I said, this stuff of the Pentagon and Bigelow, who's involved with them out there, I've heard the word metamaterials pop up. And when I said that, his eyes just lit right up. It's like you're onto something, And when we were talking about it, I said, the metamaterials is like, what would they be looking for? Kind of like in the way it kind of phrases, what would they be looking for if you were looking for something? And basically what he implied is, what they're looking for is materials that have unusual characteristics, but not necessarily unusual compositions. It may be materials that you find here on Earth, but the way that they're composed together, it gives them very, very unusual characteristics. This goes back to like the reported Roswell materials that could be folded up, crumpled up in your hand. You lay them on a table and they flatten completely out like a sheet of straight plastic again.
Right.
The other thing that, again, you may not see it mentioned or something like that, but just speculating here. What if you can find, let's say, for example, metals, almost going back to like the Star Trek thing that you've got like transparent aluminum. Here you've got aluminum, but let's say all of a sudden it's transparent. Again, it's got very unusual characteristics. I'm not saying that's what they found, but what if you had materials along those lines? Something could handle excessive heat. Something could actually bend that shouldn't normally bend. That's, I think, what they're looking for with the metamaterials. And it could be that's what they're trying to find from these objects, whatever they are.
Well, Nick Pope probably has inside information, too, that he can't talk about.
Oh, I'm sure he does. And I've never heard him offer that up. And a couple times matter of fact, one time I was in a bar very late where he happened to be at, and he still wasn't offering anything up. I'll give him credit for that one. But again, Nick seemed like a very nice guy. But you're right. He seemed to be also knowing exactly what he can say and what he can't say. Mm-hmm. Going back to security. I met Travis Walton, very interesting gentleman who went through abduction type situation. Back in the 1970s. And he's one I can definitely say that something appeared to happen to him that changed his whole life from that encounter he had. As a matter of fact, Robert Salas is one that was very, very guarded. It seemed like, and that's the best way to describe it. He's one who was involved back at Malmstrom Air Force Base, back with the missile silos up in Montana, up in that region. That goes back to the 1960s, and I got to spend a few days with him. And I was just trying to, live my life through his eyes on there, Henry, that when we were talking, he's talking about being in the capsules, which is basically the things below ground at the missile bases, where the personnel was at. And he's describing about alarms going off, and then suddenly he's describing like the missiles going offline. And you just try to picture yourself in that situation that, wow, here's a guy that's in charge of a missile system, reportedly also earlier that they'd seen a UFO outside of the base where they were at.
Right.
An orange spear. And he notifies his commander, who says, okay, let me know if anything unusual happens. The next thing you know, this UFO is back, and all of a sudden the alarms go off and the missiles start going offline. And you're thinking, what could take a missile offline? Well, sure, it could be a failure of equipment. Again, this is 1960s technology. They had the designers of the equipment come in and inspect everything afterwards. And the only thing they could come up with is almost like a electromagnetic burst of some sort that knocked them offline. That's the only thing they could come up with. And to my knowledge, we didn't have anything along those lines at that time that we'd even developed. So, I mean, here Robert Salas is telling me about these missiles going offline, then they had to manually basically go out and get them all back online, almost like rebooting the computers. You think, what would it be like in his shoes going through that type of a situation?
Oh, yeah. Like the country or even you are in danger of whatever these things might be.
Oh, sure. And you think about it, when you start opening your mind up, you say, gee, if they had the power to shut down a missile, they probably also had the power to fire them up.
True. Or
so
blow
if they
them
wanted
up.
to create something aggressive, they could do it.
Yeah.
And I've heard the rumors out there where supposedly things had been powered up, but then never came online.
Yeah, a lot of those missile complexes and silos has all been taken offline now.
Right.
Yep.
People are living in some of those missile silos as houses now.
Yep. Yep. I used to have to travel out to them when I was in the service in North Dakota.
And you hear the stories from these guys, and it just really, wakes up this whole subject when you hear it directly from the people. Mm-hmm. Jim Pennison was another one who was involved with Rendlesham Forest I got to spend a few days with. And again, I always like to try to see things through their eyes. Let them talk about their stories. Let them talk about their experiences. And you try to, I guess you could say, walk in their shoes and visualize it like they were seeing it. And when I talked to Pennison, he was describing how their things went out there. And again, I'm going out of memory here. But he was talking originally about, if I remember correctly, that they were there at one time, then they came back. And when he went out to investigate, he went out with, saw the triangular-shaped object in the woods hovering above the ground. And when I met him, this is the first time he started talking about touching the object and then having visions of the binary code in his mind. And he had his old notebook with all the code he wrote down that he's kind of coming up without a memory. I'm like, think about that. You think about the possibilities of somebody touching an object like that, and would it be possible to transmit like a binary code? What if it did transmit? What would it represent? And if you think about it, numbers would be a good way to pass on information through a code, a binary code. Supposedly, those codes represented longitude and latitudes. Now, I can't confirm anything was really found there, but I found it very interesting that it related back to that.
So have you tried to contact some of these to have them on your show?
Well, I've got to start reaching out. The thing that's held me up right now is my weird work schedule.
Really? You got a
Yeah.
weird work schedule, huh?
Oh, yeah, they put me on Saturdays now. So before I did your show tonight, I had to go in and put in a full day today.
Oh.
Which kind of ruined my Saturday. Yours is the bright side. Theirs ruined it.
Well, I thank you.
But the problem I've got is, and that's why I'm looking for October so strongly, is it's going to free up time that I can take and do interviews and record the show anytime I want. Which right now, the other situation I have is my wife has some medical issues that really create some challenges to work around. And it just really creates havoc in the schedule. So when I do my radio shows, to be honest with you, Henry, I'm doing them at like midnight and 2 in the morning even, recording.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you record yours and then play them?
Yeah, I record mine, and I'll go back and add some things in later on and stuff like that, and I'll edit it. But as I'm getting more confident in what I'm doing on there, it's a lot easier. The first time I did my first show was just like doing a kid writing a school paper. You're putting it off number one, and then when you start doing it, you go back and redo it 10, 20, 30 times, But I'm getting to the point now I can just shoot right through it. Pretty much straight shot.
Well, that's good.
But that's the problem I've had right now is just I do the pre-recording just around my work schedule and the other commitments I have taking care of my wife on there.
Yeah, you have a co-host also?
I did, but again, the time frames. He wouldn't have been able to make the time frames I can.
Ah, okay.
That's the challenge on there.
Gotcha.
Not that I don't want one.
No.
But it's just that with the wife situation, it really put me a little bit behind the 8 ball.
Right.
Scheduling things on there. But we're making it work. We'll make it work.
Barbara, you still with us?
I am, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Jump right in.
The question I have when you talk to people, which is more fascinating and more realistic that you consider reasonably accurate and true? Is it people with experiences and no evidence to back it up, or is it people who try to give you photographic or video evidence?
That's a good question, Barbara. With the photographic or video evidence, when they give me that stuff, I get a lot of that. I'll probably get, 2, 3, 4 times a week, not through MUFON, but through private individuals wanting to submit me pictures and videos and stuff like that of something they think is unusual. The little challenge is I like to always go in and look at the information inside the video, especially if they do it on a cell phone, it's got GPS. And the worst part is if it's night, a lot of times with night, the camera really doesn't capture it that well just because it's trying to not only autofocus, but try to set its own exposure settings. So at night, you don't have a whole lot of luck. But I do like to look the things over, and I haven't found super, super solid videos yet. I've found some very interesting I'm still working on, but nothing that's been that smoking gun out there. The one thing I did run into on several cases right in a row was somebody hoaxing videos and hoaxing photographs. One on there, Barbara, was in Canada that somebody sent me some photos to analyze. And they sent me photos of an alien standing at their bed. And it's interesting that once you dug in deep enough that the alien really had a look very similar to a Halloween costume. Especially when you pulled him up online and he saw the exact same costume, basically.
Yeah.
And their story didn't quite add up. The other one was the individual who had the phone app that put an alien in automatically. And it was a real grainy photograph at night of a log pile up in Canada where the individual supposedly came out of his house, saw this bright red light. His dog goes running out to investigate. He goes out and finds this alien in like a woodshed and takes a photograph of it. Well, this alien had the exact same look almost as the Halloween costume, but when he analyzed the photograph, it really appeared to be more of a Photoshop type enhancement. The unfortunate part was the local newspapers were picking up on these reports that were being turned in. And there was a very good case in the area that appeared to be a very good case by somebody who had a very professional background that submitted a case to MUFON that I couldn't contact because some of these other things were coming out at the same time. And I think the person got cold feet and thought they were going to get made fun of. And I think they actually may have had a very, very good story. And all they had, Barbara, was the story.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't have the photographic evidence. What they had was a story describing some experiences that happened at night regarding encounters at night, aliens reportedly coming in a room. And the thing I looked at was they didn't tell me what their background was initially. But I did my research on the internet. And one of the things I love to do is I will go on Facebook and look at stuff, but I also go to LinkedIn. And I found this individual who had a very, very unique name on LinkedIn. And I looked up his background. And it was a background that would be very, let's just say, it wouldn't be very good for his career possibly if it came out that he was reporting aliens in his room.
Yeah.
Wow.
Because of that. And so going back to your question on there, he had the interesting story. You had a couple other cases come out after that had photographs, but the photographs were no good, and I think they really damaged getting information from him, which may have been a much better case to really work on. So when it comes back to photographic evidence, those can be interesting, but again, I haven't really seen the super, super good photos that you'd really want to see. A lot of what we're getting overall is the good story. When it comes down to potential abduction, there's some interesting evidence, but there's nothing to say it 100% beyond a shadow of a doubt that the evidence has been left by an abduction experience. It's just unusual characteristics with chemicals in unusual spots.
Wow.
To me,
Yeah.
I love to talk to the people who have the interesting stories, but really good substance behind it.
Right. Yeah.
And they're consistent in their stories too, which is probably better.
It's a very big thing. And also if you can get more than one witness, of which is times, a lot of the cases we get primarily have one witness. Or if another witness happens to chime in, or somebody says there's another witness, I'd like to have a dime for every time somebody said, oh, there's been 20 witnesses. Well, there's 20 people in the area where they saw that, but that doesn't mean everybody saw it.
Right.
True. true.
I mean, that was the sticker with Travis Walton. He had absolutely no evidence of an abduction, but he had people who he was there 1 minute and gone the next.
Correct. Yeah, when they came back, he was gone. So you had witnesses saying, yeah, hey, when we left, he was there, but when we came back, he was gone, and the search parties couldn't find anything.
No tracks or nothing.
No tracks,
From the
nothing
area.
like that. And you did have trees with growth rings about 5 times greater than normal around the year when that happened.
You see, no, I didn't realize that.
Yeah, one of my friends actually happens to have the tree samples that was taken because one of the shows was out several years ago was called Chasing UFOs. It was really bad to begin with, and it reminded me more of somebody watched Finding Bigfoot and said, let's take some of the things from Finding Bigfoot and make a UFO show with it.
Oh,
So let's have people run through the night with night vision on and backpacks with cameras recording stuff, looking for UFOs. And one of the things that they did is they went out to where Travis Walton had his reported abduction at, and Travis walked him through the whole thing. Which, I mean, that part, great. But then they started trying to collect evidence from trees in the region, and that there had been a fire that had gone through that region a number of years, some years after his event. So it's very likely the trees that they were cutting into grew after Travis Walton had his experience.
Ah, okay.
So the show was trying to do that, but actually there were samples taken before the fire. And that's what one of my friends has and said, yeah, the growth ring's really unusual at that time frame. They don't know why, but I mean, you're looking about 5 times greater for the growth rings.
And that's odd because radiation would probably make it grow slower, not faster.
You would think, yeah. You would think.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
well, a lot of the shows that they have on now, not just about UFOs, but about Bigfoot or whatever, they seem to be grabbing at straws just to try and have a show. I seen this one where this one group was taking water samples from a creek to prove that that's where Bigfoot been drinking from.
Really?
Yeah.
Huh. Was it a very, very slow flowing creek, or was it fast flowing? Or
No, it's just a creek.
see, to me, I mean, rather than taking the water samples, look for footprints first.
Yeah.
That may be a better indication. But you're right. Some of those shows do a major reach, and I think what it boils down to is building something that will get an audience back for another episode.
Yeah, they have to do stuff like that. I mean,
Yeah, and that's the unfortunate thing on it, because you know that not just like looking at the UFOs, but the Bigfoot, the paranormal, all these various areas, there's great stories out there that's never hitting the public, that's much better than what they're seeing on TV.
Yeah. It also teaches bad science.
Oh,
Also, I mean, you look at taking water from a creek to try to find saliva. Hello.
yeah. I mean, I still
Yeah.
couldn't
Bad
figure
investigation, bad science. Yeah.
that. But
yeah. And I've been down that road before, some of the stuff that my friends have been analyzing too. Metals that have been collected from like 2 years before, but the show brings it out like it's brand new, and the evidence is actually old, and it's nothing unusual. I don't know how many times I've got some that people bring stuff in that may actually goes back to slag. I've got a container in my office in here this guy gave me the one day that says, oh, this is really unusual metal. You won't find things like this. and he's saying it's from a UFO. Well, I asked him to begin with where he got it from, and I knew that there's a foundry right where he was at. And all he was getting is like pieces of slag, melted down pieces of metal from something else. And I even remember one of the guys I knew a number of years ago told me that at this foundry, this factory, that sometimes a vending machine would turn up missing. And the guys got mad at the vending machine and ran a forklift through it and took it over and melted it down. Now, they probably took the money out first and any food, but he says, yeah, the whole vending machine would just turn up missing. And it could be that's part of what I've got in my office in here for all I know.
Or the aliens needed a snack.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, when I was down at doing a talk about a week or so ago down in St. Mary's, Ohio, which is down by Wapakoneta, where the Neil Armstrong Museum's at, I was talking to an individual down there who had also taken evidence from somebody, had it analyzed, and it turned out to be slag from a foundry the same way.
Wow. Barbara, I know you got some more. I'm not going to...
Oh, yeah. It just reminds me of Fordite. It's a new rock. When Henry Ford had his paint factories, the leftover, the excess, the samples that they were giving out, they basically threw them into a giant pit, and all the colors swirled together. People dug it up later and thought it was a new mineral when it turns out it's paint.
Paint.
Yeah, and they call it Fordite. Henry Ford's. Yeah.
I haven't heard that. I do remember the story, though, about Henry Ford, though, saying you'd have a car any color you want as long as it's black. Back when the Model Ts came out.
That's all they had was black.
Yeah, that's all they had.
Yeah.
A question did come in. I want to get this in because it's kind of a good one. And when you talk to abductees, do you think that this new policy the Army and Air Force have of interviewing pilots, do they include questions like, do you feel you had any mental communication with these objects at all?
I haven't heard of anybody bring that out. Regards like Fravor, some of the other ones who have come out recently talk about their experiences. I haven't heard anything along those lines where they're looking at any possible effects from the encounter coming out, physical or mental aspects on there, any type of communications.
I'm sure they didn't have any missing time either, did they?
Not that I'm aware of on there. There were a couple of shows that tried to, on TV, to try to go after that avenue of, when Project Blue Book was on, I think they had an episode where one of the pilots had supposed like mental images from his encounter, but again, in Blue Book, a lot of stuff was being made up.
Right.
Unfortunately, on that TV show.
Yep, on the TV show. Yep.
But certainly that was or is part of some people's experience.
And I can't deny that. The thing is, it's just not hitting public eyes as far as I know. But I can't deny on there, Barbara, that they're not looking at that side because, like I mentioned, the Army Reserve people, they were being questioned along those lines. Have you had, experiences, difficulty sleeping? Have you had visions? So if they did that in the 1970s, I can't see why they would have stopped that now.
Right. Well, that's one of the things that Barney and Betty Hill had, wasn't it? They had problems bringing stuff up and not sleeping good and everything.
Right. Exactly.
Well, that was due to mental oppression or blocks.
Right.
So do you think that with this new policy that somehow they're feeling that, okay, the aliens aren't even trying to block it anymore?
That's what it almost seems like. If it's aliens or whoever it is, they're not they're not trying to fight us anyway. When you look at some of the reports of some of the pilots, they said, and the radar people, it said these objects are moving, descended down from like 30,000 feet down to 50 and then back up to 30,000 feet like they didn't have a care in the world. And it was like after they had an encounter with one of our craft, it's like, okay, just leave us alone.
Right.
You know? So it almost appears like they don't care.
Well, the way it sounded also, the captain of the ship wasn't too worried over it and wasn't trying to do anything to find out what was going on.
No, I mean, they scrambled the planes up. He actually gave them permission just because it was more of a potential danger of having a collision. That's what they were really concerned about, a possible collision with something up there. That's why they investigated it. But you're right. He didn't seem, I mean, you think that over a 2-week period, they'd seen about 100 of these objects, 80 to 100 at different times.
Right.
You thought they would have been scrambling almost every time you saw something like that pop up. But it makes you wonder too, Henry, if this came out in 2004, did they have other experiences before this, or did the captain even have other experiences before this?
Right.
Involving the same type of thing that he knew he couldn't do anything about it.
Right. That's a possibility. And who knows, the higher-ups in the government that knows stuff could have already issued secret, things to them that they're not supposed to bother them or try to shoot them down or anything.
That's very possible.
Yeah.
That is very possible. Can't deny that either.
No. Yeah, there's a lot more that the government knows about them, and I don't think it's just the United States. I think the UFOs are all over the world, and I'm sure that other governments already know about them too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this is just a time in the United States period where the United States has come out and been more vocal about them than they ever have been.
Yeah. Somebody in the chat just made a good point, which is, why do you waste jet fuel chasing something you can't catch?
Well, that's it exactly.
Yep.
I had the stories come out before I ever heard anything about the Nimitz or the Roosevelt. I had an individual telling me the same story back about 2009 during the Gulf War, when he was in the Gulf War, that they were scrambling jets that they just gave up on because they couldn't do anything to stay with them.
Yeah.
But it sounded real parallel to what came out with the Nimitz.
Yeah, they just I think the government doesn't want it out plainly and say yes we know, because I still think that they think it would be panic around the world.
Yeah, there may be, but there's been different ones out there now thinking that this may be the beginning of disclosure.
Yeah, it's a possibility.
It may be coming out, but
possibility.
I'm not going to hold my breath on it.
All right. Well, I want to thank you for being with us tonight. We are down less than a minute, so I want you to tell everybody how they can follow you and get in contact with you.
Well, if you want to follow me on the radio, you can check out Ufodacy on Odyssey One, or you can check me out on various podcast groups looking up Ufodacy. And if you want to contact me, one of the best ways is through email. My own personal email at MUFON, MUFON .Wertman, WERTMAN @gmail.com.
All right. With that, we're going to take off. Next week we got Craig Rupp and Patty Wilson will be with us, talking about some of her books and some of the investigations that they've done in Gettysburg. So until then, this is Henry Foister.
And Barbara Duncan.
We will see you next week at the same time. So good night, everybody. You've been listening to the Paranormal View on the Para-X Radio Network. Join us again next week at the same time for more of the Paranormal